What you're hearing right now is a 24-bit stereo mix, but there was no mixer. Well, sorta. The mix you're hearing was done automatically by AI. The audio you're hearing, wait, let's turn it off. This audio was the mix directly out of the rough cut, and this audio is the AI mix. But no mixers were harmed in the making of this episode, and I'd like to show you why. It all starts with this phrase: a jack of all trades is a master of none. You know the phrase, and I want to ask what's your take on it, because I kind of hate it. I'd love to hear in the comments how you feel when you think about being a jack of all trades versus a master of none. Seriously, tell me if I'm overreacting. Here's why I dislike this phrase. I think it's because of the way it makes me feel when I'm learning a new skill, or I'm improving on an old one, or I'm inspired by someone I look up to try something new, and I feel like I'm already being criticized for my lack of proficiency, because somewhere out there, someone is better than me. Someone's already mastered a skill while I'm just limping along. And a jack of all trades, master of none is the kind of phrase that can be used as a dig, and at times it discourages me from trying new things, or at least telling people about it. Like any of us need to be reminded that there's an endless supply of people with better skills and talents. We all understand that. And it's why we seek out teachers and mentors, leaders, and training videos to look for good advice. You should check out episode 8 because we dive a little bit deeper into criticism and share some lessons we've learned. But what bothers me most when I look at the jack of all trades phrase again, it's suggesting that skills only fall into two groups. And if you're like me, you don't like the two options staring back at you. But why does it have to be this way? What if it were possible to change that saying from being a jack of all trades, master of none, to being a master of all trades? The fact of the matter is, when it comes to skills, none of us possess the talent to be great at everything. But creating art is such a vast and complex process, we have to find ways to fill the gaps. One way to think about this problem is to visualize each person as if we're a slice of Swiss cheese. I know, bear with me. Most creatives have a skill we learn, let's say writing, and that probably means we're highly imaginative, great at brainstorming, collaborating, and have strong recall memory, and are highly functional working independently. But it's also possible writers may not be as proficient in skills like compositing, sound mixing, or color correction. These knowledge gaps show up as holes in our slice. How about a director? They're typically good leaders. Most people who direct professionally were an editor at one point. Probably will also have experience with color correction or sound mixing. But 3D animation or music scoring or pulling focus might be areas that are missing. When it comes to creating content, a common approach is to assemble a team whose members possess the skills you lack. Cinematographers who aren't compositors, compositors who aren't actors, actors who aren't mixers, mixers who aren't colorists, colorists who aren't composers. Each person in your team may have knowledge gaps, but because they're all different, the gaps in knowledge between each slice are different. This is why when I build teams, I'm not just looking at the individual contributor, I examine how each person fits against the others on the same team. That way, when everyone's aligned and can collaborate successfully, every single knowledge gap is covered by at least one other person. But even though this is a good way to solve knowledge gaps, there's still a problem with this configuration that bothers me. When critical skills are missing, you need to increase the size or scale of your team. Now, increasing the size sounds fine at first, but in adding more people to your team, you tend to give up some amount of flexibility or control. My brother Peter's always reminding us of this problem as we build the Strada platform. He says scalability and flexibility are always at odds with each other. If you want a team comprised of diverse skills, you lose some control over each task. When you want more control, a preference that nearly all creatives have, you need to sacrifice size, skills, or scale in order to preserve it. This is a constant balancing act, and it seems as though the only way to deal with it is to take more time, or hire more people, or worse, lower your standards. But what if it didn't have to be that way? Could AI be a solution to this problem? Well, a recent survey was done by Creator Now in which 2,000 creators were asked about how they use AI, and the results are really interesting. Not surprisingly, more than 75% said AI increases the speed of their work. But what I found really fascinating is that nearly half of those polled said they're using AI to fill a knowledge gap. Now that's interesting. Roughly the same amount said AI improves the quality of their work in some way, and a few said it saved them money. I think what we're looking at is an early indicator that AI is a technology that could disrupt the balance between flexibility and scalability, giving us the creative control that we're after, increasing the quality, and doing so on smaller teams. And here's how. At Strada, we believe that fine-tuned AI models will infinitely increase efficiency by taskifying the workflow process. This is what I think the Creator Now graph is really pointing at. If half the creators survey are using AI to fill a knowledge gap, then it means they can intentionally farm out a task to AI to fill that gap instead of spending resources to solve it using traditional methods. That means fine-tuned AI tasks might inch us a little bit closer to being that master of all trades. But if this train of thought of AI taking jobs is making you squirm, you're not alone. But I want to clarify where I see a misconception. A lot of people I talk to don't like the idea of AI because it means executives or non-creatives who are in charge are just going to push a few buttons and AI will automatically deliver a perfect output and replace 99% of creative jobs. The reason this is not going to happen is because if AI fills a skills gap, each model only fills the gap of the discipline it's designed for. Again, check out episode 12. In other words, workflow AI models are designed for the skills gaps of workflow experts, not the skills gap of the executive. Artists will use AI solutions tailored for artists, whereas the executive may use totally different AI models to fill their skill gaps, like Mira, an AI calendar management tool, or AI research tools like Anthropic, or Quillbot, a tool you could use to summarize articles in the Wall Street Journal. I call this the skills gap principle. To me, AI is not about filling gaps where there is no skill. If you have no artistic skill, AI won't magically make you a legitimate artist. But if you know a little bit about what you want, AI can be a tool to fill certain gaps. Applying this principle across others on your team means a smaller team with limited resources can begin to act like a bigger team with more resources. And when a smaller team can do more, you're able to retain greater creative control. Now let's examine the skills gap principle a little bit closer. First, think about the trade you consider yourself to be a master of. Could be color correction, editing, mixing, composing, writing, or even storyboarding. Now think of an alternative routine task that happens a lot in your workflow. That task is either in close proximity to your core skill or it's far away. Next, think about the value you place on that task. The type of project you're working on could mean you assign a really high value to that task. But on a different project, that same task may have a lower value. Based on these quadrants, you can think of a task in a workflow and plot it. If the task is near your mastered skill and you put a high value on the task, it's likely that you'll happily invest the time to do it yourself or take the time to become proficient at that skill. If you consider it a high value, but it's way outside your core competency or you lack the time to execute it, you'll likely hire a specialist to do it for you. But if the task is in close proximity to your trade and you consider the value to be low or medium, this is an emerging area of opportunity in which AI may be an ideal solution to fill that gap. To many, this is where hitting the easy button increases speed and quality and gets the job done without eliminating a job because there may not have been a job to do this low-value task in the first place. And that leaves the areas that fall far from your core competency and are considered to be tasks of low value. AI probably can't help much here, and neither can your experiences because they're so far outside your expertise. And this area is precisely why I don't think AI is something to fear for a lot of creative jobs. AI isn't likely going to be attractive, certainly not used well, by people who don't know anything about the job to be done. If you lack context, you can't properly harness the tech, and the results might even make your project worse. Now, I admit at some point this model breaks down when you assign tasks to it, but for a lot of situations, this could help create a map that helps define where AI may be useful and where it's not a threat to professionals. Regardless of AI's maturity, we'll always need domain experts to teach AI what is good and influence fine-tuned models. You should check out episode 12 to learn more about these types of AI models. The further a task gets from the skill you've mastered, the less you know how to do it, the less valuable AI models become. Now here's how I can put the skills gap principle into practice. In episode 9, I mentioned that I'm a musician in my spare time. My musical Swiss cheese slice looks something like this. I'm proficient in 9 musical instruments like violin, guitar, piano, drums, and I also write and record original music, which means I have a good handle on the recording equipment, microphones, and sound editing. I do all these things because they're close to my core skill and my heart, and I put a high value on composing and recording my own songs. But when it comes to the polish and mastering of my own songs, well, that's a skill where I'm not nearly as proficient compared to others, and I have less experience and even less interest in it. My first record, I was fairly happy with the music, but I watched 100 YouTube videos on how to get a better final mix, and I never really developed a knack for it. I didn't fully understand it, and I ultimately wasn't happy with the final results. But when I recorded my second album, I found a tool called eMastered. eMastered is an AI tool that takes a balanced music track and will automatically mix it for you. I upload a track, it analyzes the music, and then outputs a mix. Here's the before of one of my songs. And here's the same section after eMastered. This result, which was automatic by the way, was better than the countless hours I previously spent trying to master songs without it. Then as my confidence in eMaster improved, I pushed it a little further. I can upload a reference track of a song I like, and eMastered will analyze the song and mix my track in the same way. I can also control the mix with simple sliders, so things like intensity can be configured independently from the amount of compression, or even deciding how much width to add to the song. Again, here's the same song, only now an entirely new mix generated in seconds using simple sliders. Now again, I sense that squirming feeling. I'm not saying the idea here is to replace mixers. A mixer who has mastered the art of mixing is always going to be the best choice. And if you're a mixer who loves doing it, AI isn't necessarily going to be encroaching on your space. And if you're not a mixer, but you assign a high value to it, you'll find a professional to do it for you anyway. The point of the skills gap principle is to fill a knowledge gap where the option, in this case, for having a mixer isn't available. I don't have the resources for someone to mix my songs, but eMaster filled my knowledge gap so that I was able to retain total control and I was willing to accept the results that it was capable of creating. And you know what? I think it sounds good. More importantly, it's way better than my first record, which I tried to master myself, and it does it in just a few minutes. In fact, you've been hearing eMastered in the last few episodes of this series. When editing our episodes, we do a premix along the way in the timeline. Then when the picture is locked, I export the audio to eMastered, and with no effort, I get a final 24-bit wave that I drop into a timeline, and I'm done. There was never going to be a mixing job for this YouTube series, but thanks to eMastered, you're hearing a full mix with virtually no effort, covering a skills gap, saving me time, and allowing me to keep the control that I want, something critical to small teams. But after all this, there's one more reason I don't think AI is nearly the threat to creative jobs that some people fear. And the answer, at least for me, is surprisingly obvious. For artists, the act of creating is satisfying. Playing an instrument is satisfying. Writing a script is satisfying. Acting, shooting, lighting, coloring, editing, compositing, composing, recording, mixing. These are all tasks that people take pleasure in doing. For the tasks that I love to do, it will never matter how good AI gets, because for me, some tasks aren't about the result. They're about the creative process, the craft, the art of creating. A friend of mine who likes my music recently asked me if I was upset that people can now write a song without knowing anything about music, something I'm not sure is even a new problem. It doesn't bother me if someone with no musical talent can now write a song with AI, because they're only after the result, not an experience. If you're a musician, there's joy in playing your instrument that AI will never, ever satisfy. And someone who knows a lot about music who chooses to use AI will almost certainly do a better job than someone using the same AI who knows nothing about music. Remember, filling a skills gap breaks down the further away the task is from the trade you've mastered. That's why I think writers are the best equipped to fully harness ChatGPT. Colorists will get the best results from ColorLab AI. Re-recording mixers will get the best results from tools like eMastered. And even AI tools that write code, they'll be best when driven by engineers who are experts in C++. At Strada, we're building a marketplace not to replace creative jobs, but to deliver creatives unlimited resources to fill knowledge gaps and up-level quality and save time and retain creative control. We invite you to sign up at strada.tech to get early access as we build this platform. And as we make our way towards 2024, I think it's about time to stop talking about what Strada is going to do and start showing it. You want to see?